Well, I want to welcome you to this lecture. This lecture is one on structure, and it's going to be on basically a flat rock in the desert. And one might not think that this is an important structure, but I think we'll find that it has quite a bit of influence on how life exists and where in the desert. So let's get started. First thing we want to know is that, a flat rock can be of almost any size. Later on we'll get into a three-dimensional rock, a rock that rises up out of the desert ground, and above the ground. But for this lecture we're talking about a rock that's relatively flat to the plane of the ground. And if we were to draw something like that looking edgewise, it would look something maybe, and we could use something like maybe a red brick is kind of an example, although it might be much larger. And it would look something like that. Now, let's say we had a rock that was exactly this size, and let's kind of take a look and see what would happen as the environment goes through years and years and different weather situations. Well, the first thing that we realize is that, of course, a rock is less absorbent than the ground around it. Now, different rocks can absorb different amounts of water, but the end result is, though, that it doesn't absorb near as much water. So if we were to get some rain, and it would rain down on our little rock, and it would rain down out here on the ground, and let's say, for the sake of our example here, that the rain came along and got the ground out here, we'll say the same as a rock, and let's say that's 1 inch, just so we have some kind of a number. So the rain came down here and soaked the ground to about 1 inch. But you got to remember, the rain here hit this rock. The rock absorbed very little of it. And so it ran off this way, and it would go this way too, because it's reasonably flat in this particular scenario, and start pouring and seeping off right into here. Now, what that's going to do is basically the soil now is going to be like this. Our soak in the dirt is going to be much deeper. It's going to come down. Now let's just use, again, just to have some numbers to work with. Let's say this is 3 inches here. Our rock gets enough water to its edges to soak the ground 3 inches, and normally out here in this particular rain, it's 1 inch. Now, it doesn't seem like that would be a huge difference, but let's take a look at what's going to happen. Now, the rain's going to go on. Our sun's going to come out, start shining, start providing energy, and maybe we got a seed over here and it sprouts. Got maybe a little flower here or something, a couple just of leaves maybe. But at some point, very quickly, the ground here is going to dry out. There's going to be enough sun's energy to take that first inch of moisture and evaporate it. However, if you remember here, we have 3 inches of soak around this rock. Well, what's happened is, if there was a plant that got started here, it has more actually than just 2 more inches of soaked soil, because that soaked soil now has 1 inch above it to protect it from the sun. So it's actually got an an inch of insulation to protect it from being evaporated, to protect it thermally. So this is actually a little cooler down here, and it's got this protection. So a plant that gets started over here, little flower, little seed or something, little piece of grass, if it gets its roots, it might have started here, but if it reaches to this, it's got this protected underground moisture, and it can even have them where the moisture comes back underneath this rock. Now, the interesting thing to know about this rock can do a number of different things. If this rock is a white rock, it's going to be much cooler. It's actually going to reflect the radiant energy, so that down here, just an inch down, is actually going to be considerably cooler. Or vice versa, if it's a black rock, it can actually be, the difference between a black and a white rock can actually be as much as 30 degrees Fahrenheit. So if it's a winter rain, there might be just enough absorbed energy here to keep this plant going, to germinate it and to keep it going. Where out here it's literally freezing and it's unable to do it. So here in the winter we'd have a warm situation, and we would have a situation with more moisture. So suddenly you get this plant growth. Now, of course, the vice versa of that, if we had this black rock and you get a rain, it would still collect more water, but it would be hotter. So these are variations in this flat rock theme that you have to look for, but they're there. Now, again, one of the crucial elements to understanding any environment is time. And time is important in this because this situation has happened year after year after year after year. And what that means is what you'll find around this rock, if we were looking at it from, say here, looking at it from the top, let's say our rock is a round rock, and you find this ring around it, it usually gets more moisture. What you're going to find also is that soil is of a finer material. It's a richer material. It's ages and ages and ages of plants and grass and roots have grown, sprouted, died back and forth. And so the outline area, this area out here, away from that moisture zone, is going to be a more coarse material. It's not going to be as enriched as this area right around the rock. And that has different things going on. For one, it makes it difficult for another seed to get embedded. But at the same time, if the seed does, it has a better start. And a lot of times, if you, anybody who's messed around as a kid out in the desert, you know, if you pull open a rock, a lot of times you're going to find centipedes, scorpions, and all these other little critters in there. What they do is they'll find a place here and they'll just bore right under there, and they're going for that moisture. They're living in that. Of course, that little hole is a place for seeds and whatnot to get started, and for animals and so forth. So a lot of times when you pull open this flat rock and you find all this critters, you'll also notice that soil is finer. And so it's another place where the desert really changes. And a lot of times you can actually look at a place and you'll see that there's similar soils, but one has a scattering of rocks, and it's going to be, you're going to see more grass, you're going to see more plants, and a lot of times you'll see at this site, you'll actually see a greasewood or a mesquite or something actually grow, and you think, well, why is that rock, embedded in that little mesquite tree? Well, it's really, the mesquite tree has found that little piece of flat rock and was able to survive there because this area is running off all the water, and so the plants here can use it. Whereas further away from that rock, there isn't the water resource, and there isn't the soil resource as well. So when we look at these little flat rocks, and it can be anything from just an inch to something as large as a house, depending on where you're at and how big the rock can be. And of course, that's another thing that we find over and over again in the desert, is that we have to be aware of scale. And a very small rock, a rock that's an inch in diameter, that's flat and laying on the ground, is going to have a very small influence on the area around it, whereas a rock that's maybe a foot in diameter will have much more influence on what the water and what grows around it. And certainly one that's 4 or 5 or 6 feet in diameter will have a tremendous influence on what grows immediately around it. So we have to look at the scale, we want to look at the color, we have to look at the actual shape, because again, no rock is perfectly flat and going to have a perfect ring around it. Indeed, even just the slightest bit of topography on this rock might have it all running off maybe into this direction, and so this ring might be fairly tight here and actually a little bit bigger or deeper, depending on the soil, of how that ring looks. But once you start looking at this pattern, you'll see that it's kind of an interesting matrix, if you will, of the desert that reoccurs millions of times and makes a huge difference on where and how life can exist in the desert. And with that, I thank you. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and we'll see you. Thank you.